got my flat Sunday. It's getting here.
Well, glad to have you here.
Who is this
Gene
lady?
Kane, everybody.
Who is this lady?
Gene Kane.
Jean.
Kane, like the bad one in the Bible. C-A-I-N.
Welcome.
I had a high school friend named Gene Kane. Did you talk to him?
Always nice to have new faces. So we are in our last lesson of our Christmas lessons. And it is from the Gospel of Matthew. And it is the story of the wise men. And as we go through our lesson this morning, maybe we can dispel a few myths about the story of the wise men. I guess legend and history tell a little bit different story from the scripture. So as we go through it and talk a little bit about it, we'll see if we can stick to the scripture instead of sticking to legends. So our lesson this morning, the wise men's worship. We are going to be looking at Matthew 2, 1 through 11. And as I read from Matthew 2, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of King Herod, wise men from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star at its rising and have come to worship him." So as we look at the start of this passage, and we think of the Christmas story as we have been going through it, and you look at most of the manger scenes that you see during the holidays, everybody has the shepherds and the angels and the manger and the wise men, all of them, all gathered together for the Christmas story. So, but as we go through this, we're going to find that that's not exactly the way it was. So after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of King Herod. Who was King Herod? Anybody know?
He was a descendant of Esau.
He was a descendant of Esau. He was not from the Jewish background. He was on the throne because the Romans put his father, Antipas, in a position of leadership, and King Herod took over for him. He was what we would call a good administrator. He rebuilt the temple in Jerusalem, had a big building program, but he was also very devious and very cruel. As he sat on the throne during his reign, it was not above him to kill anybody that got in his way. He killed sons, he killed relatives, he killed people in general, and he killed anybody that he thought would challenge him in his rightful place, what he thought was on the throne. So,
Let me ask you a question.
yes.
You talk about he was from Esau.
Right.
Okay. What makes you a Jew? Being a descendant of Abraham?
Being a descendant of Abraham through the chosen son, through Jacob and through Jacob's sons and through the 12 sons, going that way. Esau was not the chosen line. Does anybody know the tribes that came from Esau?
Edomites.
The Edomites. And that's what King Herod was. And this was Herod the Great. So ruled a long time. And, like I said, was not in the line of David. So if he heard about somebody being born to be king, would that challenge him?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And especially if he heard about somebody being born in the line of David, because they would have a rightful claim to the throne because that was not his bloodline. He was put there by the Romans. So was not a popular administrator. Certainly, like I said, very cruel, but with that said, was a good administrator. The days of King Herod, wise men from the east arrived in Jerusalem. We look at these wise men. How many of these wise men came?
We don't know.
We don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us. So, tells us that there was 3 because there was 3 gifts. But we really don't know. We don't know. Certainly there was more than 1, but we don't know if there was 3 or 4 or 5 or just really don't know.
There was more than 3 wise men. I hope there was 4 wise.
So, and they came from the east, probably, history tells us probably from the Medo-Persian Empire. And why do you think they were called wise men?
They were astrologers.
Right. They were, solely dedicated to studying different sciences, medicine, astrology, and all the other sciences that go with that, astronomy. So, had a reputation of being very knowledgeable about things like stars and astronomy and telling the future and that kind of stuff. And, when they came from the east and they saw the star, why would they come to Jerusalem?
That was the capital.
That was the capital. Absolutely. If you saw a star or you saw a heavenly sign, and according to your knowledge, you thought that was the sign of a royal being born somewhere, you would always go where the seat of power is. So they saw this sign, they made the journey, came to Jerusalem where the seat of power was, and of course started asking, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? Now, when we look at that first sentence, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, does that kind of tell us something about the dating of this story? Do you think it happened when Jesus was born, right away?
No.
So when these men came, they saw a star. How long of a journey was it from where they were to where Jesus was born? A long time, long way. So a very perilous journey, and it took a lot of dedication on their part to see this sign and then want to see what was going on. So pretty good idea that the wise men weren't there when Jesus was born. They weren't at the manger scene, even though, in our nice manger scenes, it looks good. Probably wasn't so. So where is he who has been born King of the Jews? And isn't it interesting, if we look at this sentence, who were they asking this from?
Whoever would listen.
They went into the city. They just started asking around. Didn't go anywhere in particular. They went to the capital and started asking, because they wouldn't have known. Where is it? Where is this royal that's being born?
Sounds like they thought everybody should know.
Exactly. And of course, if this was a typical dynasty like we see in England or some of the others, wouldn't that be the case if, the king has a son who's the new heir of the throne? Wouldn't everybody know that?
Wouldn't it have taken the news a long time to
Gotten to
when
them.
the shepherds appeared?
Right.
For to travel that far?
But don't you think this is a little bit different royalty here?
Oh,
Because they were thinking royal family and royalty, and so they would go to the capital and ask about the royal family, which would typically be King Herod's family. That's where they would be looking for that. A little bit different here because this king was not born in a palace. This king wasn't born to what we typically think of as human royalty. So what they were looking for was not what was taking place. They didn't know. And look what it says, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? Do you think that's an interesting statement? How would they know that he was king of the Jews. How would they know to ask, where's this royal who's king of the Jews?
Well, it was prophesied.
Was prophesied, but remember, these are Persians or Medes, a long ways away that have no Jewish history, and yet they come into Jerusalem after a long. Where's the king of the Jews? How would they know that this king was king? Why wouldn't he be king in King Herod's family or king of some other family? Okay, why do you think they would have any clue of why is this king of the Jews?
Well, God gave them that through some way.
Well, I think if we look at, let's back up and look at history a little bit. Yeah, what happened to the Jews in the last 400 years before the New Testament started? They were scattered everywhere. Remember, in the dispersion, when the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom got taken over, what group of Jews continued as a continuous group? The southern kingdom or the northern kingdom? Southern kingdom. The two kingdoms. The other 10 tribes dispersed everywhere. And a lot of the Jews went east. They went to Persia and other places because they were taken that way. Remember, Persia came in and took them over. So, when they were allowed to return back to Jerusalem, that was, over 100 years later. So a lot of the Jews who were taken into captivity stayed where they were. It was two generations or 3 generations after they were conquered that they were living in and around all these areas. Now, they stayed, with their Jewish heritage, but not as a continuous group like the southern tribes. So, when you look at the Samaritans, during the Bible times and during Jesus' time, they worshiped in Hebrew worship. They just weren't accepted by what we call the Hebrews, the ones who stayed together in the southern kingdom. So they had their heritage in those areas. And if they worshiped as a group and worshiped the one true God, these wise men would probably have heard of the coming Messiah. Because was the promised Messiah prophesied in the Old Testament scriptures? Yes, it was. Yes, it was. So these prophecies were probably, passed down through those generations, just like they were in Jerusalem. Don't know that for a fact, but that's a good explanation of how these men could have heard about and know about this particular king being prophesied. And when they saw this star or group of stars or whatever it is, heavenly sign that they were looking for, that to them alerted them to the fact that this was taking place.
Was there no Jewish temple in Jerusalem at that time?
Yes, there was.
Why didn't they go there first?
Well, good question. And they may be. We don't know where they were asking about where this Jewish king. They may have been on the steps of the temple, asking, okay, where's this king? He's been born, we want to see him. And of course, would they have known particularly that it was a baby or a toddler or a teenager, or would they have had any way of knowing?
Probably not.
Probably not. They saw the sign, and when they saw the sign, they knew something happened, and they came looking to see if they could identify this particular person. When King Herod heard this, he was deeply disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. Why would he? We talked about this a few minutes ago. Why would he be deeply disturbed? Deeply disturbed being, really agitated.
He was king.
He was king, and he was king not through bloodlines. He wasn't in the line of David. He was sitting on David's throne in Jerusalem, basically as a usurper, not in the line of David. So if he heard rumors in the city of Jerusalem about a king born in the line of David, would he like to know who that was? I think so. I think so, because certainly if the Jews at that time knew a person was born in the line of David, would they make him king? Absolutely they would, because, God promised them and what kind of king were the Jews looking for? Military king. So in their prophecies, to their mind, they were looking for somebody to come to deliver them from the Roman occupation. So if they heard rumors of a king being born in the line of David, they would be ecstatic. And certainly, with an unpopular king like this, if there was a king born in the line of David, they would replace this king in a heartbeat. They wouldn't hesitate. So we saw that he was deeply disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. So he assembled all the chief priests and scribes of the people and asked them where the Christ would be born. Isn't it interesting that when he heard about this, who did he go to get his information? The religious leaders, right? If there was a prophecy, shouldn't these leaders know about it?
Well, he called him the Christ. Where did that come from to him?
Well, he would have known about the line of David. Through the Jewish influence, he would have heard of the coming Messiah. I mean, that was a big deal in Jewish history. There was prophecy after prophecy after prophecy of a coming Messiah who was going to come and deliver the children of Israel. So, and Christ means Messiah, the anointed one. So he certainly would have known that. And what did the scribes and the Pharisees and the chief priest tell him? Born in Bethlehem. Does anybody know the scripture that's from, that prophecy?
Micah.
Absolutely. Micah 5:2. So certainly it was predicted in Bethlehem of Judea, they told him, because this is what was written by the prophet. And the prophet is Micah. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, because out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. How big a town was Bethlehem? Was it a big, prosperous town where royalty sat and little bitty farming town that wasn't much to it really, and really its only real distinction was that it was the birthplace of David. It was David's town. So certainly that's not a place you would think of royalty being born, but that, as we look at the prophecies throughout the Old Testament, how many of them didn't come true?
None.
None of them. All of them came true. Every single one of them. The whole purpose of Matthew's gospel is taking Old Testament prophecies and pointing them to this particular person so that anybody who read Matthew's gospel would know that this particular person was the Messiah. Matthew wrote to a Jewish audience primarily, and he constantly pulls up Old Testament prophecies pointing to Jesus as the one that these prophecies were talking about. And that's what he's doing here. This is the child that was prophesied in Micah. Micah said he was going to be born in Bethlehem. He was born in Bethlehem. Because out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people. Jesus ever called a shepherd?
Yes.
Many times, many times. What adjective preceded shepherd when we talk about Jesus?
Good shepherd.
The good shepherd. We look at John 10:11, he's constantly called the good shepherd. And isn't it interesting that what was David's profession when he was growing up? He was a shepherd. So we have the earthly King David being born in Bethlehem. And now we have the Messiah who was born in Bethlehem, who would become the Good Shepherd. So very good analogies that Matthew is using to make sure that his Jewish followers and Jewish readers would know who this baby was. So let's look over our next passage. Verse 7, then Herod secretly summoned the wise men and asked them to the exact time the star appeared. Why do you think he did it in secret? As we look over in the first 6 verses, he hasn't met the wise men yet. He has nothing to do with it. When he finds out it's in Bethlehem, and he finds out these people are looking for him, he calls them to talk to them, but he doesn't do it in open court. He does it in private. He does it in secret. Why do you think he was doing that? Very, very devious. I think, if he did it in open court, how quickly do you think that would have gotten around all of Jerusalem? Pretty quickly, huh? So, if these 3 wise men came to open court and had a meeting with Herod, everybody in the city would know about it. Did he want, if this truly was a baby being born who was in the royal line, did Herod want everybody to know about it?
No.
The fewer the people, the better. So if he could control the situation, then he had an opportunity to do something about it. And asking the exact, why would he need to know the exact time the star appeared?
To know how old the child was.
To know how old this particular person was. If they saw this star 10 years ago or 15 years ago or last month, it would give him some clue as to who he was looking for. Because think about it, he already knew the place. Now, if he knew it was Bethlehem and he sent his soldiers to Bethlehem to start looking for this child, do you think if the parents knew that he was coming, they would hide the child? Absolutely. They would do everything they could, to thwart Herod's attempt at killing this baby or this teenager or this adult. So if he could control the situation, he knew where the town was. If he could find out the age of the child, give him a little bit more information, then he could do something a little bit more exact. Secretly summoned the wise men and asked them the exact time the star appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the child. When you find him, report back to me so that I can go and worship him. Is that exactly what he had in mind?
No.
He certainly wanted to find the child, but I don't think it was to worship him. Now, look at the contrast here as we study this passage. Who was truly wanting to worship this child? The wise men. Were these wise men Jewish?
No.
They were Gentiles. They were pagans. They didn't know the one true God. Now, look at the court. Who did Herod ask about this particular child? The religious leaders of the court and the wise men too, but certainly in the beginning, he asked the Jewish leadership. Now, if the Jewish leadership knew that a child was being born and knew the child and knew the prophecy of the child being born in Bethlehem, why don't we hear about the Jewish leadership wanting to go worship this child? Kind of a contrast, isn't it? Matthew is very deliberate here in showing the contrast of the pagans saw the sign wanted to worship this particular royal baby. The Jews, on the other hand, didn't see the sign, but had the written prophecies from their own scriptures, but yet didn't want to worship the child. And here we have the leadership of the city of Jerusalem was trying to find out where this child was for the purpose of making sure it didn't take over his throne. So you had the political leadership and the religious leadership of the Jews not worshiping, and the pagans wanting to worship. Does that sound familiar of things that are going to take place in the future? What happens when Jesus walks on the earth? Did the Jews support him?
No, they didn't.
No. What did they do?
They killed him.
They put him on the cross. Now, he rose on the third day, but Jesus' followers went out and preached the gospel. Who did they preach the gospel to first?
The Jews.
The Jews, absolutely. Now, did the Jews accept him and we have a great big Jewish church and we didn't need the Gentiles? Is that what happened? No. No. What happened?
He was the stone that the Jews rejected.
He was the stone. He was the stumbling block, and the Jews rejected him. Then what did God do?
Sent him to the Gentiles.
Sent him to the Gentiles. Did he step in with something special to get it to the Gentiles? Paul, absolutely. Jesus appeared to Paul and gave him his mission to go to the Gentiles. So here we have, in the very beginning when Jesus is born, we have the Gentiles wanting to worship and the Jews rejecting him. And when he rose again on the third day, we have the same thing. The Jews rejected him and the Gentiles accepted him. So kind of a preview of what's going to take place in the future. Go and search carefully for the child. When you find him, report back to me so that I can go and worship him. So we know he wasn't going to worship him. Now, what do you think the wise men thought when he gave them this order?
Well, they probably thought it was true at first.
I think certainly, the wise men came into Jerusalem, and when Herod called them in, they were probably pretty fired up. We get to meet with the king. They didn't know any better. They didn't know Herod. So, went to the king, and they probably thought, well, absolutely, we're going to go worship him. We know you're probably going to want to, honor him, give him gifts, and do the same thing we're doing. So when we find him, no problem. We'll come back and tell you all about it. Do you think King Herod was happy about that?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Think about it. Herod didn't have to do anything. He didn't have to send his army out, didn't have to make any inquiries. All he did was he had these nice men. I keep saying 3 men, but these men were going to go take care of it for him. They were going to locate this particular person, come back, and then he could deal with the situation after they identified where this child was. So, look at verse 9. After hearing the king, they went on their way, and there it was, the star they had seen at its rising. Look at that sentence. Why do you think Matthew mentions the star here again? As we read through the story, history tells us that a star came up and guided them to Jerusalem, and then they went through Jerusalem, and the star guided them to the manger and then sat over the manger.
It was a
But-
sign.
It was a sign, but look at what Matthew does. He's kind of divided it up into two different stars, or the same star appearing twice. Because, you know, as we came over here, you know, they arrived in the east of Jerusalem, and then it says that after hearing the king, they went on the way, and there it was, a star they had seen at its rising. It led them until they came and stopped above the place. So they saw whatever the sign was at its rising. Why do you think he put in they had seen at its rising? What do you think that indicated?
In the east, it was rising in the east, and they followed it from the east to the west.
East to the, certainly, I think as we look at this particular passage, they had a sign that moved across the sky. You know, if you've ever sat out and watched the stars, you know the stars like the sun and the moon, they move across the sky. And of course, these magi, these wise men, were from the east. And as it came up and moved, it moved from the east to the west, gave them the direction that they needed to go to find this particular child. Now, do you think this was happenstance that it just showed up?
No.
Why?
Nothing's happenstance.
Well, let's think about the let's think about the story. You know, over the last 4 or 5 weeks, as we've talked about this story, you know, has God been involved in the development of this story from the beginning?
Yes.
Absolutely. From you know, just as our lessons, you know, with the miracle of the birth and getting them to Bethlehem because of the census, you know, God has been actively involved in this whole scenario. And here we have God being involved again. And look who he's being involved with. You know, when we look at some of the other involvement, it was with Joseph and Mary, you know, and the Jewish family. But look, here he's involved with pagans. Why do you think that was necessary?
They were experts in astrology.
Absolutely experts in astrology, and they would have,
This was unusual.
they would recognize this unusual star or group of stars or sign. But why not have, you know, the star appear to part of the royal family of the Jews to bring them there?
Jesus came to save everybody.
To save everybody. Here we have the first indication that this is not just a Jewish story. This is a story for everybody. Because even though he was born King of the Jews, he was the Messiah for everybody. Because was he coming to set up an earthly kingdom?
No.
When Pilate asked Jesus if he was a king, does anybody know what he said?
You say
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, well, part of it. A little further on in John, look at John 18:37. This is Jesus responding to Pilate. To this end have I been born, and to this end am I come into the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth. So Jesus, at the end of his life, explained to Pilate that this being born was what he was, that was his mission. He was born for a specific purpose. And as we look at our passages, this purpose was to set up a kingdom. And it was a spiritual kingdom. Now, the Jews didn't know that, misunderstood. As you said, a stumbling block. And it led them until it came and stopped above the place where the child was. Another miraculous sign? I think so. Because think about it, if this was a nighttime star that typically moved across the sky, would that particular star have led them to a specific place and stopped over it?
I think so.
Probably.
Well, certainly it did, but is that typical of stars that we see in the nighttime sky?
This is a special star.
I mean, we don't think of stars moving out of their constellations and moving to a particular place and stopping. I mean, that's just not what stars typically do. So certainly another miraculous sign that God has intervened for a particular purpose. And look at verse 9 toward the end of it, and stopped above the place where the child was. Does that kind of give us an indication that they weren't at the manger? Because if Matthew wanted to place them with the shepherds, would he have used that terminology? I don't think so. Why would he change from, Luke's gospel where they're talking about a baby in a manger, and here Matthew is talking about a child, not a baby. So here again, we get a little indication that this was probably between a year and 2 years after the birth of Jesus. Now, do we know why Mary and Joseph were still in Bethlehem?
God asked them to stay there.
Stay there.
In a dream.
Right. They went there, and typically they would have left and come back to Nazareth. That's where they were from. But they stayed there.
Why?
Because God wanted it that way. Do we know why he wanted them to stay in Bethlehem? Once again, not part of this lesson, but for future references, where was Jesus from when they talked about him as an adult? Did they say Jesus of Bethlehem? It was Nazareth, right? So if he was from Nazareth, why didn't they go back to Nazareth?
The king wanted all the kids to be killed.
Right. And God intervened in that, didn't he? Where did Joseph and Mary go?
Egypt.
They went to Egypt. And on their way back from Egypt, they were going back to Bethlehem. And what did God do?
Told them to go to Nazareth.
Told them to go to Nazareth. Why?
Save his life.
Well, save his life. But by then, Herod the Great was dead. So why go back to Nazareth? Fulfillment of prophecy. Everything that happened in this scenario was prophesied. And God made sure that it was going to take place. He was prophesied to be born in Bethlehem. He was prophesied to be from Nazareth. God set it up that all those were fulfilled. Matthew was identifying this so Matthew's audience could point to this child and say, all these prophecies in your scriptures is this child. So there was no doubt. Entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and falling to their knees, they worshiped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. When we think of true worship, both in the New Testament as well as in the Old Testament, what are maybe two adjectives that we can think of that identifies true worship? Let's think about these men as they walk in and see this child. what would be two adjectives that would describe these men to identify true worship?
Adoration.
Adoration,
Bowing,
yes.
humble,
Humble, humility. Now think about these men, wealthy, educated, well respected, and look what they did to a child. This is probably a toddler. What did they do?
Gave him gifts.
They gave him gifts, but what was the first thing they did?
Worship.
They fell down on their knees. They humbled themselves before Jesus. Now, let's think about that in the New Testament age. When we think about Jesus, what kind of attitude should we have? Same kind, right? We should humble ourselves before the King of the universe. True worship is a worship of humility. What's another adjective that might describe these men? Was this an easy journey for them?
Dedication.
Dedication, absolutely. Sacrifice. Do you think they had to put themselves out to come and worship this baby? Think about their journey. I mean, they came, a huge distance over mountains and desert. It cost them a lot of money. Very, very dangerous to find this particular child. Big sacrifice on their part. And they didn't know if they were going to find him or not. What kind of sacrifice do we make when we worship the Lord? Our sacrifice, is coming to Sunday school or coming to church on Sunday. Is that the extent of our sacrifice? What about all the blessings that God gives us? Do we share, our resources with God? Do we sacrifice our time? We have a pretty easy Christian life in this country. We don't have to hide in a back room to worship. We have the freedom to practice our religion in the open. We have the freedom to tell people about Jesus. These men sacrificed greatly to worship the Savior. And the attitude we have in our day and age needs to be this kind of attitude. Sacrifice in our worship with humility before the King of the universe. And I think that's what Matthew is trying to get across to us. Over and over, Matthew's identified this child and what this child is going to be and what the prophecies say is going to happen. And they all came true. And as he died on the cross and rose again, it gives us the opportunity to tell people about that and do it with humility. A great lesson, a great group of lessons. Over the next 6 weeks, we are going to me, I think, have a group of lessons that are really going to be significant. Our next group of lessons are engaging culture in an ever-changing world. And, if you look around the world today and look at the culture that we're living in, we're in the world, in God's kingdom, and we've got to deal with that changing culture. And we're going to be talking about all the different ways that the culture is going to affect us and in our Christian walk. So I think we're going to have some really terrific lessons over the next 6 weeks. Thank y'all for joining us this morning. As I say every week, our purpose here is to study the Word of God. These videos are for seniors who are homebound and others who wish to participate. I post these on YouTube, so you don't have to be on Facebook to watch them. If you would like to watch every Sunday morning, please join us. We would love to have you with us. thank everybody here for coming. Nice to have new faces. Thank you again. Look forward to having you back. And Charlie, if you would, sir, if you will close us out.
Almighty God, as we start this new year, I thank you, God, for being reminded that